clatter rang out as Shenjiu sent the little black dish flying with a kick. He crossed his arms and said nothing. The youth, who was either 14 or 15, shrank back while the young boys around him couldn't help but send him encouragement with their eyes. So he steeled himself and put on a brave face to say, Shenjiu, don't think you can just throw your weight around. You don't own the street. What gives you the right to tell us we can't stay? This main street was wide and even, and many people came and went upon it. If one wanted to beg, it was the best and prime location. Some of the passerby watched this group of children fight, but even more hurried on their way. And this new brat had the gall to challenge him. Shenjiu looked down and around, preparing to find a brick with which to teach him a lesson, when a tall youth happened to walk over. He saw Shenjiu rolling up his sleeves, head lowered, and hastily went to stop him. Xiaojiu, let's go somewhere else. No, said Shenjiu. I'm staying here. That first youth took the opportunity to tattle. Qige, he's bullying me. That wasn't bullying, Shu, said Yueqi. Xiaojiu was just joking around. Who's joking? Said Shenjiu. I'm telling him to get lost. This is my territory. I'll kill anyone who tries to steal it. With Yueqi standing in front of him, Shu grew bold. He leaned forward and yelled, Every time we go to a new place, you always hog the best spot. Everyone's been sick of you for ages. You think you're all that? That everyone's afraid of you? Shu, Yueqi scolded. Amidst the struggle, Shenjiu kicked Yueqi in the shin. If you want to fight, I will give you one. Only losers would blame their spot for their incompetence. You bastard! Who's your Qige? I dare you say that again. You're the bastard. I bet you'll be sold off soon and end up as a pimp. Yueqi didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Where did you learn that kind of nonsense language? Then he dragged Shenjiu off to the side of the road while coaxing him. All right, you're the most competent one here. Even if you didn't pick and choose your spot, you'd be the best. So let's change streets. Shenjiu stepped on his foot. Get off me! Like I'm scared. Come on, fight me. Want to gang up on me? Go ahead. Of course, Yueqi knew he wasn't scared. If he really let Shenjiu brawl with the other kids, he would fight dirty. He'd gorge at their eyes and kick them in the belly or crotch or shin. He was terribly vicious, and the other party would be the one to end up suffering and bawling in terror. Yueqi forced down a smile. Are you done stepping on my foot yet? If you are, stop it. Qige will take you somewhere fun. What shitty fun? Shenjiu asked savagely. The most fun I have is if they are all dead. Yueqi looked at him helplessly and shook his head. With a qi for quote 7 and jiu for 9, naturally there had also been 1 through 6. But the previous batch of children had either been sold off or was long dead. Of the children left, these two were the closest. When Shenjiu had been a little younger, he'd been small and skinny. Yueqi had held his head while they sat on the ground, a letter of blood before them. Written on it was a tale of how all their siblings and parents had died, how they'd stumbled upon hardship while searching for other relatives, and how now they were penniless and alone, drifters without anyone to depend on, etc. According to the orders given to them, Yueqi should have wailed and wept, but no matter what, he never could manage to cry. Therefore, this task had instead fallen to Shenjiu, even though he was faking an illness that supposedly left him too feeble to weep. But he was small, and his face wasn't too unsightly to look at, so whenever he sobbed and bawled, the passerby found him pitiful and generously opened their wallets. It would have been no exaggeration to call him a money tree. Eventually, as Yueqi gradually grew older, he had become less and less willing to do this kind of thing, and so he'd been relegated to patrolling and keeping a lookout. Shenjiu had wanted to go with him but had been forbidden to do so. Therefore, he continued to terrorize the streets, a scourge to everyone in his path. As the pair were about to head away from the most prosperous street in town, there suddenly came the sound of thundering hooves. Store owners on both sides of the street paled in a panic. Those with carts pushed them away, while others ran as if their mortal enemy approached. Yueqi didn't understand the reason for this, but Shenjiu had just dragged him to the roadside when a gigantic horse turned onto the street. The horse's bit was forged from pure gold, heavy and solid, gleaming and bright. Haughtily riding astride the beast was a spirited and youthful young master. His face was fair and striking, his brows and eyes slender. Where the light struck his dark irises, 2 brilliant pinpoints shone, the effect blindingly piercing. His purple hem fluttered against both sides of his saddle. His narrow sleeves sat snug around his wrists, and in his pale hand he gripped a jet-black whip. Dazzled by the gold, Shenjiu couldn't help but lean out to look, but Yueqi quickly pulled him backward, and the two of them retreated. They hadn't walked for long when they heard a scream and the sound of people scattering. A group of young boys sprinted toward them and pounced on Yueqi one after another, practically smearing him with their terrified snot and tears. Shenjiu flew into a rage, but Yueqi hurriedly said, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" "Shiwu is gone!" someone wailed. Yueqi halted in his tracks. "He didn't follow you?" "There was too much going on," the child bawled. "I couldn't see clearly." "Don't panic. Slow down and tell me everything." As it turned out, when the young master on horseback had taken his guards past the street entrance, he glanced sideways and spotted Shiwu and the other children on the street corner. "Where are they from?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "They're beggar children, your Master Chiu," said a guard. "We don't know where they come from." "What are you doing, allowing such filthy things to hang about?" The guards needed no further instructions from their master. They brazenly stalked over to chase the children away, but Shiwu had been unwilling to leave so easily, not after he'd finally managed to snatch away Shenjiu's territory. He yelled angrily, "What gives you the right to kick us out?" He wanted to finish with, "You don't own this street," but then that youthful young master waved his hand. A dark shadow descended, slashing a bloody whip mark onto Shiwu's face. The wound was barely a hair's breadth from his eye. Shiwu had yet to register the pain. He was scared stiff. That youthful young master smiled brightly. "What right? Not much of one. It's just that my family built this street." Whether from pain or fright, Shiwu collapsed to the ground with a thud. Shenjiu hadn't finished listening to this tale before he burst into loud laughter, but he soon found himself unable to laugh any more. Yueqi did a head count and discovered that some other children were missing as well. He looked back and said, "You should go. I'll come soon." Shenjiu was full of schadenfreude. "Leave it. Don't go poking your nose into this. That chill guy doesn't actually have the guts to kill them." Yueqi shook his head. "You go back. I'm the oldest. I can't leave this alone." "He won't die," Shenjiu insisted. "At most he'll just be beaten up. That'll teach him a lesson." "Go back," said Yueqi. Unable to restrain him, Shenjiu spat. You meddle too much! After yelling this, he ran after him. Qījiu thought that Shenjiu was incredibly fun. It was like hitting a dog. If he hit a dog, it would duck its head and cringe, cowering away as it whimpered. Though this reaction posed no threat, it also wasn't very interesting. However, if you stepped on this dog, it would growl low in its throat while staring at you fearfully. But it'd be too afraid to fight back, and that was interesting. He gave Shenjiu a slap. By now, Shenjiu had doubtless mentally sworn to fuck the Qiu family's grave 118 times, but he could only take these kicks. He even exposed his face for Qījiu to hit. How incredibly fun. As Qījiu thought this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Shenjiu had just taken a good beating and was currently cowering off to the side. Qījiu practically rolled with laughter as he eyed him. After he'd purchased Shenjiu, he'd lock him up for a few days, leaving him covered in grime and filth. When Qījiu looked at him again, he had been utterly disgusted, so he'd pick him up, dangle him like a kitten as he walked over to several heavy-set guards, and then told them to, quote, scrub him clean. Thereafter, Shenjiu had been given a thorough scrubbing and cleaning, to the point that they'd almost scoured off a layer of his skin. Then they'd lug him back to the study. Now that years of grime and dust had been boiled off of him, and because they'd pressed too hard when washing his face and arms, his pale skin glowed with a soft flush, while his wet hair still steamed from the bath. Standing off to the side, neatly dressed, he really did cut a rather pitiful figure. Qījiu studied him for a long time, head cocked. A strange feeling rose in his heart, alongside a dash of fondness. He even held back the kick he'd planning on giving him. Can you read? He asked. I know a couple of characters, Shenjiu said quietly. Qījiu laid out a sheet of snow-white paper, then rapped on the desk. Try to write them. Shenjiu reluctantly picked up a wolf hair brush and held it, his grip surprisingly correct. He dipped it into some ink and thought for a moment, then first wrote a 7. After another pause, he wrote a 9. Though the direction of his strokes were all wrong, the results were neither crooked nor slanted. Indeed, they were uniform and impeccable. Where did you learn these? Asked Qījiu. I watched someone write. This brat knew absolutely fuck all. He only understood how to copy patterns. Yet he'd been able to fool Qījiu, which left him incredibly surprised. Thus, feeling increasingly amiable, he copied the tone of his family's old tutor and praised the boy. You have some talent. If you put in some effort into studying, you too might be able to go places. Qījiu was only 16, 4 years older than Shenjiu, and he bore the weight of all of his parents' expectations. Having been raised in a house of golden bricks, he thought everyone beneath him. The only person he adored, the apple of his eye, was his little sister, Haitang. She was the darling of the entire Qiu family. Whenever Qījiu was in front of Haitang, he always played the good older brother. In the past, he'd wished his sister would never marry, and now that Shenjiu was here, he began to hatch an alternative plan. Qiu Haitang loved Shenjiu very much. If Shenjiu were properly educated, Qījiu could turn him into a brother-in-law on the cheap. That didn't seem bad at all. Then his sister would remain by his side, and he could continue using Shenjiu for his own amusement. As long as a boy remained honest and obedient, there would be no issues. If Haitang married Shenqiu, she wouldn't need to leave, and she'd still rely on their family for food, clothes, and money. It would be as good as not marrying her off in the first place. The plan had no flaws other than the fact that matching her with Shenqiu was a bit like letting a toad get a taste of some sumptuous swang meat. Having calculated his plans to perfection, Qiu Jiangluo would often give Shenqiu warnings like, "If you dare to make Haitang unhappy, I'll make sure to end your sorry life. If not for Haitang, I would have beaten you to death long ago. Humans must understand and repay kindness. Our family gave you the chance to play human, so even if it means repaying us with your whole life, that's just how it should be." The older Shenqiu grew, the more he understood that this person wouldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of disobedience. His every request was to be obeyed, even if what he heard filled in with indescribable disgust. He knew he must not express it. Only in this way could he avoid a vicious beating. But within his heart, he still thought back on the first time he'd met Qiu Jiangluo. That day had been the one and only time he'd driven the young master mad with rage. Yueqi had insisted on retrieving Shiwu and the other children. Right away, he'd almost collided with the hooves of the Qiu Jiangluo horse. In that instant, Shenqiu forgot Yueqi's warnings that it would be best not to reveal their rudimentary immortal arts to others. He transformed metal into a sharp blade and stabbed it into the horse, straight to the bone. Qiu Jiangluo and his horse spun around in place on the street, the animal rearing and bucking wildly. Shenqiu silently cursed him to fall off with all his might, to fall and break his neck. But, as it happened, Qiu Jiangluo had outstanding horse riding skills. Even with the horse's forelegs in midair, he remained firmly in the saddle. "Who did that?" he roared. "Who did it?" Of course, Shenqiu had done it. But even afterward, when Qiu Jiangluo came knocking, if Shiwu hadn't taken the initiative to say so, no one would ever have known of Shenqiu's interference. If they hadn't saved Shiwu, he would have been trampled to death beneath the Qiu family's hooves. He'd kept his sorry life only to betray them. Shiwu should have been trampled to death, trampled into mincemeat for thousands to spit upon. Qige should never have gone back to save him. Even if Shiwu had died, it would have served him right. As Shenqiu suffered through day after day of torment, he turned those sweet yet futile thoughts over and over again in his mind, drawing strength and comfort from them. And he waited for a certain someone to keep his promise to rescue him from the sea of suffering. Shenqiu thought a lot about why Yueqi never returned to look for him. Perhaps he'd been discovered while making his escape, and the human traffickers had broken his legs. Perhaps he hadn't been able to find any food on his journey and, being unwilling to beg, starved to death. Perhaps his potential had been too meager, so none of the immortal mountains had been willing to take him in. Shenqiu even imagined walking to the ends of the earth looking for Yueqi's remains, and how, after finding them, he would dig a grave with his own 2 hands. Perhaps he would even do his best to shed a tear. Or, if Yueqi was fortunate enough to still be alive, Shenqiu imagined how he himself would cast away everything to rescue Yueqi from whatever hellish straits he'd fallen into, even though Shenqiu himself had only gone from the wolf's den to a tiger's lair, and so was in dire straits himself. But no matter what, he could have never imagined this kind of reunion. He raised and lowered his sword again and again, sending blood splattering everywhere, in a horrifying tableau. Flecks of blood splashed into his eyes, but he only blinked a few times and otherwise wore no expression. One could have described his movements as deft and composed. After taking him from the chill manner, the most Wu Yangzi had taught this, quote, disciple of his were things like murder and arson, stealth and robbery, and how to profit from chaos. For example, what he was doing now, using the Immortal Alliance Conference to loot the bodies of some foolish, immature, and rich children who had thought themselves elite cultivators, divesting them of storage pouches and then disposing of their corpses. When Yueqi discovered them, he must have been stunned, frozen by Shenjiu's ghastly appearance, for he didn't even register the disciples' bodies on the ground and instead took 2 steps towards him. Shenjiu shivered and abruptly looked up. The moment Yueqi got a clear look at his face, both of them paled in bloodless white. "Stay away!" Shenjiu yelled. Unexpectedly, his first reaction was to throw himself to the ground, snatch an emergency firework from one of the bodies, and release it into the sky. Yueqi was shaken but still confused. He walked toward Shenjiu while extending his hand, opening his mouth to say, at which point a disturbing chortle emerged from the dense forest behind them. "My dear disciple, who is he? He scared you so terribly. So you do know what it is to be afraid." Shenjiu released his grip, and the firework casing fell soundlessly to the ground. He hastily turned around. "Shifu, I'm not afraid of him. I made a mistake just now. I wasn't paying proper attention," which gave the slot on the ground the chance to release a firework. "What I'm afraid of is that someone will show up soon." Yueqi had realized that this situation was incredibly dangerous. Without batting an eyelid, he began to gather spiritual energy. Wu Yangzi humphed. "When I saw that firework, I guess that was the case. You've always been quick and nimble. What happened this time? If they were going to set fireworks, why didn't you chop off their hands?" Shenjiu lowered his head. "It's all this disciple's fault. We should go at once. If those old men get here, we won't be able to leave, even if we try." But Yueqi moved to block them, raising the sword in his hand. He glanced at Shenjiu with faintly reddened eyes, his voice hoarse but unusually resolute. "I won't let you leave." Furious, Shenjiu glared at him. Wu Yangzi looked him up and down, then gave his sword the same once over. He scoffed. "From Changqiu Mountain and even Qiongjing Peak, the Xuanxu sword, Yuèqīngyuán." At this, Shenjiu startled, then swiftly returned to his urging. "Shifu, since he's from Changqiu Mountain, we won't be able to kill him swiftly. It will be better for us to escape, and fast. Once everyone's arrived, we'll be finished." Wu Yangzi sneered. "Changqiu Mountain may possess grand prestige, but I need not stoop so far as to fear a junior cultivator. Besides, he came seeking death himself." As he and Yueqi truly came to blows, Shenjiu realized that his worry for Yueqi, together with the various clumsy tricks he'd used because of it, were rather laughable. He was terrified of that, quote, master of his, Wu Yangzi, terrified to death even. But as Yueqi or Yuèqīngyuán met him in combat, he proved to be more than Wu Yangzi's equal, even without drawing his sword. Nevertheless, Shenjiu couldn't relax completely. He was all too familiar with Wu Yangzi's fighting style and last resort trump cards. Wu Yangzi had a set of cursed black light talismans. Countless times, Shenjiu had witnessed Wu Yangzi toss out one of these paper talismans when at a disadvantage and score a kill by catching his opponent off guard. More than one famous cultivator had failed to escape this sinister maneuver. Moreover, it was easy to see that as he was now, Yueqi had little experience fighting enemies. His movements were by the book, and he methodically attacked and parried in turns. Therefore, right when Wu Yangzi was about to throw a talisman, Shen Jiu stabbed a sword through his back. Yueqi grabbed his hand and frantically sprinted away. Having gone through a fierce battle, both youths were in shock. They leaned against a tree, panting heavily. Once he'd calmed down, Shen Jiu finally gave Yueqi a long, thorough look. His cultivation was extraordinary, and his bearing poised and steady. His clothes weren't of the common make either, and his demeanor was exactly like that of the great masters themselves. He couldn't have been further from the hellish straits Shen Jiu had imagined. This was not Yueqi, but Yue Qingyuan. Yue Qingyuan looked excited, his face flushed as he prepared to speak. But Shen Jiu opened fire first. You joined Changqiu Mountain? Shen Jiu couldn't tell what Yue Qingyuan was thinking, but the excitement on his face faded a little. Indeed, his complexion paled. You've become Chongding Peak's head disciple? Not bad, said Shen Jiu. You didn't come back to look for me? Shen Jiu waited for some time, but the next words never came. So he said, Why aren't you saying anything? I'm still waiting. I've already waited so many years after all. Waiting a little longer will be nothing. But how could Yue Qingyuan say anything? Shen Jiu crossed his arms. Finally, his waiting was rewarded with Yue Qingyuan's quiet words. Sorry, it's Qige who let you down. Ice-cold fury crawled up inside Shen Jiu, engulfing his entire heart. His mouth and nose seemed to fill with the taste of his frenzied, raging blood. First, he'd been a rat forced to swallow its anger, cringing while awaiting more beatings. Then he'd become a gutter rat, scurrying back and forth as everyone chased and hit it. No matter how he changed, he was a rat, cowering with its tail tucked between its legs, unable to see the light, letting years slip by in vain, squandering its time and life. Meanwhile, Yue Qingyuan was a true phoenix that had flown to the summit, a cub that had leapt over the dragon's gate. Sorry, sorry, sorry. All you have known to do is say sorry. Shen Jiu sneered, then delivered the final ringing blow. It's utterly useless. Some people were rotten from birth. Shen Jiu thought of himself in exactly this way, someone vile and poisonous from the start, because at that instant he came to a crystal clear realization that he'd rather have met a Yueqi who died in some unknown corner, his remains unsightly and forgotten, than a Yue Qingyuan who was elegant and powerful, his prospects and future boundless.